Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. We are excited to have Torrin Spencer back again from the Electrification Coalition. So, Torrin, if you want to get started, that would be great.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so thank you everybody for joining. This is our second webinar in our series OUC Fleet Electrification Program. And this time we are focusing on funding opportunities for fleet electrification. We will have future events coming up. We are actually working with the City of Orlando to get a Fleet Depot site visit planned for March. So if you're actually interested in learning more about how charging and EVs are actually implemented, what it looks like once it's all on your site, we would love to talk with you, get you signed up for that event, and we will have more webinars coming up in the future as well. Before I get into any more of our programming and discussion today, I would like to give the floor to Tom Nielsen, who is the Director for New Products at OUC. Tom, you have a few words for us?
Yeah, thanks, Torrin. I want to welcome everyone to the webinar today. Thank you for your attendance. We're very excited to have as many of you as there are today on the call with us, using this as an opportunity to talk a little bit more about the electrification process and how OUC can help you move from your current fleet to an electrified fleet. Of course, this all culminates with our Ride and Drive event that we are busily planning for late October, early November of this year. And I'm excited to announce that we'll be sponsoring the Orlando Economic Partnerships Barbecue in the Park in early March. We'll be bringing a couple of our electric vehicles to that event. And for those of you who plan to be in attendance for that, we'd love for you to stop by and say hello to us. These webinars are in fact recorded, so if you weren't in attendance for the first webinar, I'd encourage you to go get the information and review that. And I'm very excited today for what Electrification Coalition and what Torrin has to share with us today about funding opportunities specific to electrification. So Torrin, with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Much appreciated. Yeah, so Tom beat me to it. So our programming just started last month. We had our first webinar. Before that, we were outreaching to different fleets in the Orlando area. If you have any fleet contacts that have had any thoughts or any questions about electrification, we would be more than happy to loop them into this programming. There's a lot of time and a lot of material to go over between now and our Ride and Drive later this year. We are in the education phase right now, so a couple webinars. We are working on that site visit for next month, some more webinars and in-person meetings coming up this year to talk about electrification, to talk about the future of Orlando electrification, what it looks like for your location. We are also doing fleet analysis. So it's very difficult to make a informed business decision without all the information necessary. So what OUC has access to and what EC has worked on with Atlas Public Policy is create the drive tool, what we told you guys about last time. So that takes all of a fleet's VIN data, the information about the vehicle, the total time of use, and it breaks it down and shows what it would cost to run standard ICE engine vehicles and EVs. And more often than not, with vehicles at or around the size of an F-150, smaller than that, it makes great business sense to move over to an EV. So if you have any questions about that, what that looks like for your fleet, be more than happy to go over it with you and work on that drive tool analysis with you before our Ride and Drive event at the beginning of November. We're going to have fleets, tons of different OEMs, charging manufacturers together in one place for all those different fleet managers to take a look at those different options, validate them for their fleet use, get used to them, take a look at them in person, and then hopefully we'll have some commitments to electrification going forward. A couple other things we went over last time. EVs are less expensive to operate and produce fewer emissions. So like I just said, all electric, your annual fuel costs for a Chevy Bolt, one of the smaller vehicles that is used quite often for light duty fleet use. Annual fuel costs are $600 compared to just a Honda Civic. That would be about $1,400. If you go larger vehicles, trucks, it gets much more expensive. And then emissions as well. Emission goals are very important for large corporations. All electric vehicles make little less than 2 metric tons of annual emissions, as opposed to a small gas car makes about 8 metric tons of annual emissions. So definitely good information to rope into your electrification decisions. And recap of EV myths. There's a lot of myths out there about why EVs don't work for different situations. Like charging electric vehicles is inconvenient, and there aren't enough charging stations. They're too expensive, and EVs aren't actually environmentally friendly because they burn fossil fuels to produce electricity. Well, to the charging point, it only takes a few seconds to plug in. There are a lot of chargers everywhere, and cars spend a lot of time parked. So if you're in the right place, it should be easy to charge, and chargers are becoming a lot more and more common, especially with these funding opportunities that are available to us today. With the myth about vehicles being too expensive, what we're going over today, funding opportunities, they may cost more upfront for some of the larger vehicles, but it is significantly less expensive to operate. And used EVs that are still solid, still have manufacturer warranties for their battery packs can be found for significantly less than new vehicles as well. And then also with charging those vehicles, where that power is coming from. Even if an EV is fueled by 100% coal, they cut greenhouse gas emissions because there are no direct emissions from those vehicles. And also, energy plants are using cleaner technology as the days go by. Every day, OUC is working harder to make cleaner power using stronger scrubbers, getting it from different sources. So the longer we have EVs, the longer the grid is getting cleaner as well. Last time we also talked about total cost of ownership. So if you look up front to purchase an EV, sometimes it seems like converting to EVs may not be affordable. They do have a little bit bigger sticker occasionally, but the total cost of ownership model that looks at a vehicle's entire life. So the price, the depreciation, fueling costs, maintenance costs, all of that is roped in together to calculate a total cost of ownership over a certain amount of years. And then that helps us better understand how much it will cost over time. So it takes a lot of different data, a lot of different points to make an informed decision and get a really good picture of what it's going to look like to have an EV for more than just when you buy it. And we use, like I said earlier, the drive tool to do that total cost of ownership analysis. So we put in a full fleet's VINs, every vehicle with their VIN number, that total time use, and you can get a full dashboard of what it would look like, what these vehicles you have in your current fleet now look like, what some good EV replacements would look like, total cost of ownership for EVs by different scenarios, what your entire fleet looks like. There are all sorts of different things that we can show on dashboards and share them with all sorts of different people in your line of business to help you make those decisions, those purchasing decisions. And we have a lot of questions about, does it really make sense? Are there a lot of direct comparisons? There are. What we really like to use right now is comparing a standard F-150 to an F-150 Lightning. They are a little bit more upfront, but the likelihood of savings from EVs is very likely to move to a Lightning F-150 when you look at the nominal cost per mile. So the depreciation or cost of the vehicle is a little bit more. Fueling is significantly less. Insurance is very similar, but maintenance is also significantly less as well. They require fewer brake checks. They don't have any oil changes or fluid replacements, really. So those EVs make a great business case moving forward. But that was just a quick review of what we went over last time. We do have the recording up online. We can forward that to anybody who does not have the link just yet. I would like to take a second to let my colleague Matt introduce Allegra with Ohio Health. They've had a lot of success with EV conversions and EV charging at their hospitals a little further north. So Matt?
Yeah, thanks, Torin. And really excited to be with folks today. Thanks for those that did tune into the first webinar. Glad you're tuning into the second, as ultimately we're definitely trying to cover a variety of topic here as we move through the process. But today I'm most excited to be bringing friend and colleague Allegra Wiesler, who is the Sustainability Advisor for Ohio Health. Ultimately, and actually kind of pulling from comments and some great feedback off the first webinar, a number of folks were just curious to hear from fleets in the field and how the transition has been going. So we've been fortunate as an organization, we get to work nationally with a variety of programs. So Allegra is actually based in Columbus, Ohio with me. As you can tell by our jackets right now, it's a little bit chillier up here than it is down in your guys' neck of the woods. But I had the chance to work with Ohio Health, not only on fleet electrification, but charging deployment. So we thought what better way than bringing some fleets that we've worked with in the past who have been in your shoes, trying to take a look at everything going on and finding the best path forward. So we'll do this as just a casual fireside chat. I have a couple good questions for Allegra so you can get to learn about Ohio Health. I know we have a couple hospital and other logistics folks in the room, but also feel free to drop comments in the chat as well, and we can definitely broach that. But Allegra, with kind of the preamble out of the way, and thank you again for joining us. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Ohio Health? How do you guys operate, and what does your day-to-day look like?
You guys hear me?
Yes, coming through perfect.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, I'm working from home today, obviously. Yeah. Oh, so a little bit of background on Ohio Health. We are about a 15 hospital system, growing every day. Ask me next week, we probably have 2 more hospitals. But we have about 300 to 400 different non-acute care sites across all throughout Central Ohio. And as a sustainability advisor, we've been looking at fleet efficiencies. So just, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we grew so quickly. We did not know how many vehicles our system owned as a whole, because of just each different hospitals, different cost centers, and how they were brought into the system did not reflect a true centralized fleet effort. And then with my role being brought onto the system, we've been combining efficiencies with fuel reduction costs, right-sizing vehicles, and then obviously as a healthcare system, looking at the environmental but also health impacts of the vehicles that we drive every day. And so we have been working with Smart Columbus, and through that with Matt with Electrification Coalition, at just how we can better our fleet. And we've done a few studies and have some data backing that, but happy to share all of our lessons learned and best practices, as we have quite a few. But we've done a lot over the years, still more to come. But we're definitely have grown from not knowing how many vehicles we have to now having really good data for our vehicles across the system that are really driving, pun intended, a lot of our supply chain decisions. And you mentioned total cost of ownership. It's something that is now driving our costs for kind of budgeting as well.
Yeah, well, you hit on a really important aspect to that, Allegra, and it's definitely something that we really emphasize, with attendees in the room and others. It's daunting as you try to take a look at the path forward, and it's hard to find the place to start. Like you said, and I still fondly remember the first day that we sat down, and it really was just taking inventory of what fleet data you had on hand and also fleet data you didn't have on hand, or at least trying to do that gap assessment. I guess to zero in on that, which recognizing that's always kind of the struggle. What were some key takeaways or things that you'd recommend folks to focus on first, knowing that it's a little bit of focus on the low-hanging fruit, but what are some easy relatively easy places that you found to start in that effort.
Yeah, so ours was definitely low-hanging fruit, rotting on the ground. How many vehicles did we own? What is the data? What is the risk involved with not knowing some of our inventory issues we were having? And then what is the steps to move the fleet forward? So for us, it all revolved around data. So something that we started out with was putting telematic devices in our vehicles. That gave us the data we needed for kind of decision making moving forward. Telematics devices show us, just for those that might have been starting in my shoes that weren't fleet experts, just showed us, the cost per mile, where our vehicles were, where they were going. It's very important for the types of supplies and lab specimens kept in our vehicles. And then we are able to see how it's idling. So from an emissions standpoint, how are the vehicles being used? But then when we looked at electrification, we started to work with Matt's team in an electrification coalition to look at the telematics devices to understand what is the electrification viability for certain routes. We started with, I think it was 10 lab vehicles. So these are vehicles that are just running consistent routes throughout care site to care site, lab to lab, and they have very specific needs throughout the day, and then they're not running at night. So what we did was figure out which routes could go all electric through using the telematic assessment with Matt's team. But then also, where do we need charging infrastructure? And then we knew if the route could or could not go all electric, what type of electric vehicle, what range was needed. And then we just started with one car. We purchased an all-electric vehicle, and we actually right-sized the vehicle. So we actually had all of our lab vehicles have always been a Nissan Rogue, copy paste year to year. That's how the budget was built. But we needed a different vehicle. We actually were able to get a Nissan Leaf, so a battery electric vehicle. Smallest range we found was adequate, and we just were able to talk through total cost of ownership with our finance team. And that essentially led us to moving some money around from operating costs to our capital to allow us to offset the cost difference, because we had the data from the telematics that would show cost savings from an operational standpoint. And from then, it essentially, we found a route that would be most reliable to go all electric. And that route had a driver that was interested in the new technology. So we knew he would be a good person to train and bring along in the kind of, change management perspective and switching from an ICE vehicle to an all electric vehicle. And we did a bunch of branding on the car. So as a healthcare system, we're all about tailpipe emissions that impact human health. So it actually gave us the opportunity to brand the vehicle, showcasing zero tailpipe emissions. And that vehicle has been running every day since. No issues, knock on wood. But it's been our first vehicle as a pilot, and now we have many more in the system. And we can go talk about policies that we've created based off of that, but essentially starting with the data and then starting with a good pilot case with a good champions. I think that was really how we got this all started and rolling.
Yeah, I still fondly remember we did during that first EV that you guys were deploying, we got some of your leadership together along with the driver. It was a really cold day, I remember, but we were in the parking garage kind of walking it through, and that was a great way to start it. You had a lot of the core thematics, and indeed, an easy place to start is just looking at even that simple first or second route where you can have a lot of that good, even if it's a lower mileage, just to be sure that you have the confidence interval that the vehicle.
Yeah, and I don't know, we did start with a light duty vehicle because those were easy to find. The routes that we had were, predictable routes. So we did start with things that we knew best. And I think that helped from a piloting standpoint, just everyone become comfortable with the new technology. So I definitely recommend starting there if you can.
What's also nice too, since we did that work, Allegra, together, and Torrin's been mentioning the drive tool, and definitely, fleet analysis and assessment is always a great place to start. We didn't have the drive tool back then, but a nice thing to that is we're actually able to bring in your fleet data, and we're able to also cross-identify it, not just on any one specific vehicle model, but it'll actually consider all. Indeed, when we were doing Ohio Health first, it was really like the Chevy Bolt or the Nissan Leaf were our two main choices.
Yeah, they're the only cars.
It's really exciting to get to see a lot of new options that come in. The F-150, as you can imagine, been very popular with fleet choice. Yeah. You mentioned charging, and Ohio Health definitely has a little bit of a unique niche because you have a lot of charging that's really kind of a hybrid where it's used by fleet, it's used by staff, it's used by patients. Just to kind of step into that, what were you looking at as you were bearing that in mind? And I guess to kind of toot Ohio Health's horn a little bit, you guys are one of the largest charging providers in the state, if only because you have so much charging at hospitals. But how did you go about thinking about that, especially for folks that have multiple campuses or they're thinking about intermixing fleet charging with like workplace charging?
Yeah, I'll keep it a little bit more generalized outside of healthcare, but if any of the hospitals have questions on how to integrate physicians into this, happy to talk. But we did make sure that each time we installed stations, they were public facing as well as workplace facing. That is more so to tackle the equity piece around this. We also wanted to make sure that our associates and patients that were coming to our care sites have access. We installed ChargePoint as our charging stations. That gives us the ability to charge money if we need to encourage people to move their vehicles, or if we need them to pay for parking at any point when we max out on infrastructure. But when we looked at where to put stations beyond the scope of has to be 50-50 workplace and associate, we did think through, okay, what type of vehicles need to charge here? Because we were piloting this work, we weren't installing fleet-only charging. We definitely are moving forward, but just to get started, we wanted to make sure we can maximize the charging. So, our associates and patients and most of our providers that are using the stations are there during the day. We are a 24/7 facility, but most people, it's heavily used during the day. Which meant at night, the chargers were essentially left empty, and that allowed us to use the same stations at night to charge our fleet. We have some signage or language up through the ChargePoint stations that ask people to move the vehicle by the time our fleet needs to use the vehicle. So again, that's why we picked smart chargers over some of the non-network dumber chargers. But we picked a spot where we could be essentially utilizing them through the night. That also gave us more data that showed what was the utilization of the stations, at what time, how many people are charging off of them, because this also helped us to build out our charging infrastructure for new builds and new construction. So when we build a new building, how many stations do we need at that time? We have a good comfortable number because the city of Columbus doesn't quite have a stated minimum. So we kind of just figured that out ourselves with our own data, but we've made sure to install electrical infrastructure to all new builds moving forward. So every time we go in and install stations, we get the capital to install that station, but we integrate the electrical infrastructure for future 10 stations or however we can essentially max out that panel. It's because that'll allow us to install stations at a much lower cost moving forward. We have about 60, maybe 70 ports around the system now. We've seen that once a station goes in at a hospital, the next hospital wants it, because we have a lot of movement happening between the hospitals, physicians moving hospital to hospital. So we've definitely seen a higher ask. now that it's there, everyone wants it. So just be prepared for that. But I will note that we have had the opportunity to have utility grants in Central Ohio. So we have utilized a lot of utility grants. And then we have had some hospitals install the infrastructure without the use of grants. And it's a little bit higher of a curve, just our capital through healthcare systems a little bit tighter. But we have the need to build level 2 stations, public and associate workplace facing is built into our building standards moving forward. So now all we're doing is retrofitting spaces, and moving forward, it's just built into the construction costs of any new building. It'll also include fleet moving forward. We have so many vehicles now that the ability to share stations, we just don't have enough stations. We've maxed out some of the panels. So we're just having to figure out where to put them. Also to consider what type of vehicles need to charge. We have some larger vehicles like security vehicles, ambulances, box trucks. Those type of vehicles are not going to be able to fit in a parking garage to charge. So we're just having to be very intentional in where we put the charging stations as well moving forward for fleet charging.
Yeah, definitely covered a lot of the best practices there. And again, many meetings, many times on the phone, in person, for sure. And that's the exact type of, offer on the table too for folks tuning in, where we can really talk through some of these core themes. I love the notion, Allegra, of physicians almost being their own fleet of EVs. But your points, especially around just charging at large, and we find this too. Fleet charging definitely has its own cause and consideration, but especially for those entities that might have public-facing charging or thinking about that. Columbus and Orlando are actually very similar, where both have EV readiness ordinances on books now. So for new build construction, we'll need to continue to consider that. So that's a good point on having that as a organizational policy. And actually, we'll touch on that a little bit more. But I actually wanted to ask too. So we do have a couple of folks tuning in who they're not wholly owning or operating the fleets. Maybe they have contractors coming in. Ohio Health, you guys are still in the middle of talking that through, as you also do a number of fulfillment parts. How have you been navigating that, like encouraging some of those contractors or others to consider electrifying their fleet?
Yeah, so we definitely can't do this all on our own. When we look at greenhouse gas emissions and a more holistic sustainability approach, we're definitely bringing in our partners. So we have a third-party contracted courier that helps support our lab services. Sorry, my coworkers over here really passionate about EVs.
Noise cancellation great on Teams, so you're doing great.
No, they only bark actually at diesel vehicles, so I always joke that they are just pro clean technologies. But we are working with partners. We actually did another telematics study with Matt's team. I cannot reillustrate the importance of data in some of this work, because there's a lot of preconceived ideas of what an electric vehicle means and the costs associated with them. But we did telematics with our lab courier services, so third-party contracted. They run the majority of our routes, and they're more on-demand routes. So they're not always predicted routes. They're running, as needed. And it could be all over Central Ohio. So we've actually partnered with them to do telematics. So they studied which routes could go all electric, which ones could go hybrid, plug-in hybrid. We studied all of that. And they have now will be purchasing, I think it's going to be 10 all-electric vehicles to run our routes for us. And they will be using our charging stations that's at our administrative site. So 100% during the day. There is not a 24/7 building. It's only a regular office building, but we have 15 charging ports at that site that'll actually be utilizing those stations, and we'll be billing them for their electrical consumption at our site. So for us, it was a really good partnership because they're able to support our electrification requests, and we're able to support them by providing the infrastructure that's actually not being used but getting our costs back for doing so. So essentially, it's like they would have charged us for fuel. We're just now charging them for the electric to help run our routes. So it's a good partnership. I provide consulting requests for people that lease our sites and we're looking for charging stations. I'll provide that to them. And there's a ways to, adjust the charging stations for codes or billing them. So there's ways to monetize this if you'd like. You're probably not going to get all your money back or maybe over time, but it's been what we've seen as a benefit that's provided to our associates. And then we've been talking about, we're a nonprofit. So we've been talking about if we purchase the stations as a nonprofit with our own funds, is that seen as a community benefit that can be provided to the community as we have to report as a nonprofit? So just different ways of thinking through the value of the stations as it provides to, third-party fleets, but also to your own associates and to the public. So it's been very creative use of infrastructure, but it's been overall a win. Not much negative feedback so far.
No, that's excellent. And that's a great point too on, again, smart charging does unlock a number of different controls. And we've even seen, for instance, on some fleets to the operational budgets, if they actually have to do cross billing across departments, for instance, for fuel, that can be a great solution to that. So that's a good example. I'm going to shift to actually some questions we're getting in the chat, and please do feel free to drop in some chats as we wrap up this portion. So one question, which is a good one: does colder climate affect the range of EVs? And in turn, yes, we are in a colder climate up here, but so too there is actually hotter climates down in Florida. How have you guys been seeing that, Allegra? Since you're driving 24/7, we have had the temperature actually dip colder than not in the winter. So how has that been? Driving, I guess, all seasons, even in the heat of summer too.
Yeah, we do see range decrease in the winter, but we take that into account when we're studying the viability of the routes. I won't cut it close if it's on the cusp of being viable for an all-electric vehicle, and it also may move us to purchase a longer range all-electric vehicle if it's close. We haven't had issues just because we have taken that into account, but yes, it does impact range. The cold weather, I don't see much in the summers as a range impact, but yes, to the winter, but it hasn't been bad. Oh my God, my husband just shaved his beard into a mustache. I hope everyone ignored that. I'm so sorry.
No worries. No, appreciate that. And definitely, that tracks too. Colder weather can take a little bit more of that range hit. You actually have a range hit too on internal combustion engine as well, between the winter blend fuel and actually there's also inefficiencies. So definitely so too in the heat of the summer, thinking about what running the air compressor and some things that does add some auxiliary load. But like you said, and definitely where we really want to focus on supporting folks is gaming out what that scenario looks like. That also applies to what your longest range might be as you're driving. So appreciate that. We do have another question on available funding, which actually that'll be the exact next section. So we'll be able to cover that as there is a lot in the IRA and BI and bipartisan infrastructure law that actually applies to charging infrastructure. I'll both give an all call to any good questions for Allegra, and I guess overall, Allegra, if you're able to share kind of where do you see things going next? We have a lot of great wins at the light duty side. Is it scaling light duty? Is it looking at some of those box truck operations? What do you see in the cards over the next year or two for Ohio Health?
Yeah, so something that we did was integrate purchasing policy into our fleet policy. So we do have it built into a more tiered approach in how we purchase our low or zero emission vehicles, moving through hybrid, moving all the way into more internal combustion engine. So we do prioritize low zero emission vehicles and how every single vehicle moving forward, we do look at the telematics device when a new vehicle procurement request comes in, we look at the data, we understand the routes, and then we determine whether or not that vehicle can go all electric. And if not all electric, what are our other options? So what we have also done is look at moving forward, kind of prioritizing what vehicles based on the market availability can switch over to all electric. We do have some major idling happening with our shuttles that just move patients back and forth and associates back and forth between parking. Our security idles a lot on campus. And so we're trying to determine next steps. Is there technology out there that can decrease idling while maintaining, safe temperatures in the vehicles, and then moving forward, larger vehicles. So we have some, ambulances. Will those ever go all electric? Probably in the future. But just looking at moving from a light duty all the way up through the more specialized needs, how can we look and keep on track of the technology available? We just had a very hard time procuring vehicles. Would love pickup trucks. We have a request in for Lightnings when they become more available. But just getting on top of that, because I actually think there's more of a demand than vehicles available. Government might have a different pathway forward of purchasing. We don't have that. So it's the dealership down the street that is trying to help us find all these vehicles. But it's definitely our next step is moving to the heavier duty vehicles and medium duty vehicles.
Well, that's excellent. One last buzzer beater question for you, Allegra. And this is maybe one that we should have started off with too. So as you now have a couple of years under your belt on the EV deployment, do you have a sense on financial impact and savings that conversion has been able to bring? I know it's the thing of, especially as you're trying to wrestle with charging costs and other things. Do you have a sense on what the financials are as you've been doing the shift?
Yeah, so from just a vehicle procurement standpoint, we did find for our lab vehicles, the upfront cost is a little bit higher than what we had budgeted for our previous vehicles. But again, our operating costs have offset that. So again, I really highly recommend something that our system was not set up for, but really looking at a total cost of ownership for the vehicles. We found that our operating costs are lower because we don't have gas, we don't have to go in and do all of the oil changes. So our operating costs from a maintenance perspective is lower. We also found just the general operating costs from running the routes is significantly lower. I think per lab vehicle, what was it, Matt? Like $6,000 to $7,000 in savings each year for the vehicles. Yeah,
and especially to what I was really blown away by was the rate at which those routes are driven, and it really is around the clock. So yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's going to be different depending on the operations of the vehicles. Again, because we have like our security vehicles idling so much, their miles per gallon was so low. So when we had them convert to hybrid, just because they need a more police-like vehicle, we still find savings in those routes just because their usage was actually not geared towards the type of engine that they had in their cars, just from idling around campus. And from a charging station standpoint, we're just so high usage from an energy perspective that we barely see the impact from the charging stations on our bills. We just convert our garages to LEDs, and that is still less consumption than the previous, fluorescent lightings in our garages, but it's still lower. So collectively, even the cost of the capital difference in charging stations, we're still finding savings. And again, healthcare system, it's lower emissions. And when you're looking at global greenhouse gas emissions from your system, it is much less on that end. So you're not having to pay for offsets. So you're actually seeing cost differences from the front procurement end, but also you're not having to pay for offsets, renewable energy credits, things like that. So overall savings.
I appreciate that perspective, and definitely eye-opening to, I'm sure a CAT scan runs on a lot more electricity at times. And so
Yeah.
appreciate that. Well, thank you so much for joining, Allegra. If okay, we'll happy to share your contact for anyone that has a follow-up question, and definitely appreciate your helping show what the path can look like, starting from humble beginnings on what is fleet data and where does it sit. But thank you again for joining us, and we'll hand it off to Torin.
Yep, thank you all again. Yeah, please reach out if you have any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Allegra. Thank you very much for joining and giving us all of that solid information about how it all works. But we did have questions regarding some of the IRA funding, federal funding for private fleets. And that is what we are going to get to right now. And that is EV funding. So there are incentives for fleets. OUC does have a rebate for possible eligible customers. IRA programs have also been released from the Commercial Clean Vehicle Tax Credit, that's 45W. 30C also applies to fleets, and then there are grants to reduce air pollution at ports for specific shippers. And then BIL programs are the NEVI funds, so the National EV Infrastructure Program. That's indirect. It has positive outcomes for fleets. It's not necessarily for internal use, but it does mean that there are more chargers available here, there, and everywhere. The OUC rebate. OUC customers may be eligible to receive a rebate after purchasing an EV or plug-in electric vehicle. That rebate application needs to be submitted within 6 months of that purchase. And the customer and the authorized person's name have to match the purchase. But if there are some vehicles coming down the pipe for your fleet, and you are a OUC electricity customer in and around downtown Orlando, definitely look into putting that in once you purchase that vehicle for your fleet. But more federal funding. The Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, that was signed last year. There's almost $400 billion in total investment for all sorts of different things like purchase incentives, infrastructure, manufacturing, supply chain, grid resilience. It's all going to help out our overall EV and charging community. There is a little bit of a cheat sheet for different IRA programs. There's the Clean Vehicle Credit, the Commercial Clean Vehicle Credit, and the Previously Owned Clean Vehicle Credit. We'll go into those a little bit more right after this. But there are $7,500 available for light-duty vehicles, both for private consumers, individuals, and fleets. For private individuals, there is a domestic sourcing requirement, but for commercial vehicle credit, there is not, so you don't have to worry about where you get that EV from. Just get an EV. And if you get a larger EV, at or more than 14,000 pounds, there could be $40,000 available for a clean vehicle credit on that as well. And then previously owned vehicles, 7,500 available as well, and also up to 40,000 for larger classes. Like I said, the Commercial Vehicle Clean Credit, businesses that buy qualifying EVs may qualify for tax credits up to $40,000 for those larger ones. Whether it be 30% of the basis or the incremental cost of the vehicle, but the credit is not more than $7,500 for light duty under 14,000 pounds and not more than $40,000 for those larger vehicles. There's no final assembly requirement for those larger vehicles in North America. That extension is going on for a while, so it's not going away. And tax exempt entities can receive that through direct pay, and that can be a big changer for a lot of different municipalities and organizations. Some different models that can be applied with these incentives. Looking at the MSRPs of some of these different vehicles, the Bolt, Solterra, Ioniq, all sorts of different light duty vehicles, even with MSRPs of 28 to 40-ish $1,000, with those incentives after tax refunds can be in the 20s and 30s. So definitely cost effective. And it also applies for pickup trucks. I know we were talking big earlier about the F-150 and F-150 Lightning. This will apply to the Silverado EV and the Cybertruck when they become available, but it does work for the F-150 Lightning and the Rivian R1T that are available now. A customer-facing F-150 Lightning MSRP is close to 56, but with those incentives, it brings it down into the 40s, makes it even more cost-effective. Medium heavy-duty equipment are eligible as well. Maybe not the small landscaping equipment, but each of these large vehicles could qualify for up to $40,000 in incentives. There is also the alternative fuel refueling property credit that has been put in for a long-term extension. For commercial uses, the tax credit is 6% of a charging station, and the cap is increased to $100,000 per unit. So that can help out with obviously level 2, but level 3 if there is a need for a larger charger. And projects that satisfy wage apprenticeships can be eligible to up to 30% savings. Also, the grants to reduce air pollution at ports, a new program that's eligible for zero emission port equipment and EVSC. Those eligible applicants have to work with local government, local municipalities, and those that own and operate and use the port, and a portion of funds are set aside for ports in non-attainment areas. But for those that are shippers and looking to use medium heavy duty in the near future, this is definitely something to look into as well. NEVI funding, like I said earlier, this doesn't necessarily apply to fleets directly, but it does show that the national electric vehicle infrastructure and Florida's electric vehicle infrastructure is going to increase very quickly, starting very soon. A lot of this funding, almost $200 million, is going to upgrading infrastructure, operation and maintenance cost of those charging stations, going to installation of on-site electrical service equipment, and a lot of other things. The Florida plan is at fdot.gov if you want to look at it more. But we have had some implementation of chargers in OUC's service territory already. So this is actually a map of Central Florida. This is OUC's service territory. The top is the electric, and then down in the bottom is also water service territory as well. But these small green dots and blue circles are the green dots are the chargers, and the blue circles is a small range around it. So there are a lot of chargers in and around Central Florida already, following down along I-4. But we do have spaces to put them in other places, and we're looking forward to increasing the amount of chargers that are in Central Florida. And we are doing that in part with charging hubs. So there are 2 current locations, Robinson and Orange County Convention Center, that are going to be finalized soon. Pending for approval, there is one going in at the airport, and there are potential locations in and around Central Florida in blue. So hopefully we'll have large locations with multiple charging ports, charging sites, charging stations for those different fleets and drivers to use. But hopefully getting EVs and getting charging stations at your location goes hand in hand. But if it doesn't, there are charging stations in and around Orlando to use outside of your fleet depot. But overall, the IRA and BIL have a lot of new sources for funding available to fleets for purchasing and leasing EVs. Businesses can directly take advantage of some of those policies, 45W and 30C. Businesses can partner strategically with local governments on some of those grants. They can benefit from local state and governments, local grant applications to install charging infrastructure. But we're at the start of a very exciting road for transportation electrification. how this all pencils out. So I want to be very direct. If you were to get something like a Leaf for MSRP of about 37 grand with a tax credit and a possible OUC rebate, that brings the price down significantly by close to $8,000. And then if you're getting charging infrastructure, you could have upwards of $100,000 off of large chargers. So definitely good food for thought, definitely a good business case for moving to EVs. OUC also has the EV Funding Finder tool. It's a very easy to use tool at electrificationcoalition.org/EV Funding Finder. It's very easy to use. You click these buttons on the right, you click business, you click what you're interested in looking for, whether that be funds to get a light duty vehicle, large duty EV vehicle, charging stations, and it will show you what different programs are put in place to attain those and steps that you can go about to follow those different incentives. But next steps for this programming, please spread the word. We're looking to help out any and all private fleets in and around Orlando. We do want to get you all involved in our upcoming events as well. Late March, we'll be working with the city of Orlando to check out their fleet depot. And then late April, we'll have another in-person meeting or webinar regarding more of the EV climate. Please reach out to me to set up a time to discuss your fleet. We can go over drive tool and things we need for VIN analysis and next steps. We definitely want you to save the date for our ride and drive event. We are planning that for the first week in November. We're still working on exactly where we would like to host it, but it is definitely penciled in for later this year. But I did want to say thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you for coming. Thank you for spending the time. If there are any other last-minute questions while we have a few minutes, be happy to take those and go over more information with you.
And Torrin, I'll actually jump in, and please feel free to definitely drop any comments in the chat. Also, we'll be following up with all attendees on setting up some more dedicated time to talk one-on-one too and get you more resource. But there was a question on the commercial clean vehicle credit that I thought might be helpful. So we do have guidance from the IRS that Sarah dropped in. By and large, the way the guidance sits is it's 30%, up to 30% of the cost of the vehicle, if it's all electric, is what's eligible through the tax credit. There is a line there, though, on incremental cost of the vehicle, which we actually don't have clarity from the IRS on. So that would insinuate that if you're buying an EV option, you would be comparing it to the gasoline option. There are some minute differences between those vehicle models. So I just want to chime in on that in terms of a list of qualified vehicles. We do have that guidance on the commercial EV tax credit as it sits. But if you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We can even actually get you in touch with, we work with a lot of different procurement partners. So even if you're trying to figure out what that exact amount is to file for, we're happy to help you. Separately, on the individual taxpayer tax credit, so essentially the one that you and I can file for individually, we do actually have a preliminary list of those vehicles that meet the domestic sourcing requirement. So if that's of interest to non-fleet, but that's just for consumer procurement, we also have that list too. Sorry, thought it'd be helpful to chime in there. As you guys can all imagine, there's some nuance to it, but wanted to give you the helpful read.
Thanks, Matt. Question from Walter Kirkland. Do we have guidance suggestions for a municipal fleet, EV and EVSE? We would definitely direct you back to the EV Funding Finder tool. Yeah, and the good news is public and private fleets are all in the same boat now with the new IRS incentives. The one thing we're waiting for on the public side, and this is more broadly to everything underneath the 45W section of the IRS code, is the federal government is putting into place what's called a direct pay model. It's basically a way that a non-tax-paying entity, like a public entity, a nonprofit like Ohio Health and other non-federal tax-paying entities, would be able to still take advantage of that tax credit. Essentially, if you don't pay taxes, being able to be eligible. We're still waiting for guidance on that. It will absolutely happy to share that out too. That is something that's being weighted on from a number of angles because there's renewable energy efficiency upgrades, a couple of different other
topic areas that are also waiting on that direct pay, but I'm happy to share that out too, if helpful. As you can see, we're actually tracking this daily, so definitely here to answer any and all questions. We're keeping our EV funding finder also daily updated, actually, as we get new guidance too. So definitely here to be a resource.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. But yes, we'll stick around for more questions, but looks like we've finished just in time. If you do have to run, we do understand, but we'll stick around for any and all other needs. Yes, thank you, Sarah. But wanted to thank you guys again for attending, and we hope to see you guys in March and April. We will be in touch, and if you have any questions between now and then, please reach out to us. You can use my address at tspencer@ouc.com. Thank you all very much.